everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Today we are joined by Dr. Uma Swamy, one of Florida International's own. She received her BSc degree from the University of Bombay in India, her MSc degree in biochemistry from the University of Mumbai. There's a funny story to that, but I'm not going into that now. And then received her doctoral degree from Arizona State University. In 2006, she joined Florida International University as a lecturer and general chemistry coordinator, and we are the richer for it. In 2007, she was appointed coordinator of the new survey of forensic science labs and designed the first hybrid lab of its kind. She's currently developing content for a completely online chemistry lab for non-majors based on food chemistry. Today's theme is entitled Autism and Vaccines, a topical subject with the recent outbreak of measles in California. I believe Jenny McCarthy has not been invited to participate. So please welcome Dr. Uma Swamy.
So let's talk about vaccinations first. Can anybody tell me where the word vaccination came from? Yeah. Cow? Yeah, that's very correct. So the word vaccination comes from the Latin word vacca, meaning cow. So Edward Jenner was a physician in England who noticed that they called them milkmaids or cowmaids. These were ladies who brought milk from the cows. They noticed that they were not getting smallpox. Smallpox was a killer, it was a very virulent disease. He noticed that these people somehow, and their kids, never got smallpox because they were around these cows. They did, however, get a disease called cowpox. And what he figured was that because they had this cowpox, they did not get smallpox. This cowpox was very mild, very minor. Nobody died of it. So what he did is he took a little bit of the infected material from somebody who had cowpox, made an incision in the child to see if the child could be immunized against smallpox. And the child was immunized against smallpox. And this was where vaccination started. So that's the fascinating history of vaccination. Now, next question. How many of you know that you've been vaccinated? Almost everybody in the room. Now the question comes, why would anybody vaccinate themselves? Why would you want to be vaccinated?
To avoid disease.
I'm sorry?
To avoid disease, to catching a disease?
Okay, to avoid disease. So the next question to ask is, what kinds of diseases can you be vaccinated against? Can you be vaccinated against all diseases, or are there just some diseases that you can be vaccinated? Some. Okay. So can you give me an example of some kinds of diseases that you can be vaccinated against? Flu. Hepatitis, the flu. HPV. Tetanus. Measles. TB. Smallpox. Polio. Yeah. Malaria. The jury's still out on the malarial vaccine, but one does exist. So, as you see, this is a wide range of diseases. There's a mixture of viral and bacterial diseases that one can be vaccinated against. Now, a very common misconception about vaccination is, if you take the vaccination, you never get the disease. Is that true? No. We all know that's not true because we've taken the flu vaccination and occasionally we have caught the flu. But the truth is, you do not get the flu as bad as you did if you'd gotten it without the vaccine. And that is something that cannot be challenged. That is the truth. So you may end up still contracting the disease or the infection, but it's not going to be as virulent as it would have been without the vaccine. Now, a lot of people do believe that you caught the disease because you got the vaccine. I've had people tell me, I caught the flu because I got the flu shot. What do you say to that? So the way most vaccinations work is that they give you either a small part of the bacteria or the virus, which is called the antigen, or they may give you an inactivated or dead form of the virus or bacteria. Either way, that thing cannot cause disease. What it does is it causes your body's immune system to mount a response and create antibodies, which are the ones that end up protecting you. So when the virus is encountered, you already have antibodies in your system. So they will go and they will attack the virus, which is why you get it in a less virulent form. Otherwise, once you're attacked, if you hadn't had the vaccine, the body has to start making the vaccines. That takes time. So because you have the vaccine, the antibodies are ready, good to go. So this is how vaccines work. So in 1999 or 2000, there was this paper published which basically linked autism to vaccines. That paper is the root cause of all the problems we have, linking autism to vaccines. That paper has since been debunked because they were never able to reproduce their results. It was also proved that the people used questionable science in not only publishing this paper, but their intentions were also questionable. I'm not going to say any more about this than that, but if you want, you can do the research, the stories out there, as to why they published this paper and who made them publish this paper. But needless to say, the damage has been done. Have you seen the news reports recently about the outbreak of measles in Disneyland? So it spread. So it started with a couple of cases in Disneyland, and then now they have a serious problem in Chicago and a couple of other places. California and Chicago are dealing with pretty serious problems. They have had upwards of, I think, 30 to 40 kids, which is worrisome because people stopped vaccinating their kids. Measles at one point was considered eradicated, but now it's coming back. Now, how many of you have actually had the measles?
I think I've had it.
Yes. So the reason I'm asking you this is because my sister had to go to Chicago. She's supposed to travel to Chicago. My sister lives in India, and I know that there was an outbreak in Chicago, so I could not remember if she had the measles or not. I seem to remember she did, so I had to call up my mom and ask, and of course my mom knew. So my mom's like, yes, she's had the measles. She's also had the vaccine. So many of us don't remember because we had it when we were children. And it's usually better for you if you have it when you're a child because it usually doesn't do as much damage. I know somebody who had measles as an adult because they never had it as a child, they didn't take the vaccine, and there were other consequences. How many of you have heard tales of smallpox from family members? Nobody? Have you?
Not from family members, but just like smallpox outbreaks in little pockets of areas that did not receive vaccination during like the 1960s and 70s.
Mm-hmm. So smallpox was serious, and I have not seen anybody have smallpox, but I have seen somebody live with the effects of smallpox. My dad has 9 brothers and sisters, so my last but one uncle is almost deaf in one ear, and he's a little hard of hearing in the other ear. And he has those specifically called pock marks all over his face. So once my undergraduate degree, bachelor's degree is in microbiology. So my grandmother once asked me, hey, what are you doing? What exactly is it that you study? My grandmother never studied beyond 3rd grade. And I told her, well, these are some of the things that you can do with degree in microbiology. You can immunology. She said, oh, you know, the smallpox vaccine was the best thing that they ever made. So I asked her why. And that was when she told me that her 8th child and her 9th child had developed smallpox at the same time. And she had had smallpox, so she could nurse them. But my grandfather had not had smallpox, and none of her other children had had it. So she was wondering how she would manage 2 kids with smallpox. And then one of my father's cousins stepped in. Her nephew stepped in because he had the smallpox. And she tells the story of how they nursed these kids for 1 month. They had pox inside their eyes. Their eyes were closed. She was worried that her children were going to be blind. And she says, I don't know how I made it through that 1 month. It was really, really hard for me. And my aunt thankfully survived with no ill effects, but that was not the case with my uncle, who had a more severe form. So he did end up deaf in one ear and partially deaf in the other, and with pockmarks. And he was the one who was more severely affected because they almost lost him. And she told me something which I will never forget. She told me vaccination is one of the biggest boons that we have. And I didn't know about the children she had lost until she told me. And she said, you know, the saddest part, if the kids were born now, they wouldn't have been lost because we had vaccinations and all those things. So I think part of the problem is that, especially in the United States, because our healthcare is so good, we keep our surroundings so clean, the chance of diseases spreading are minimized. So many of the people who do not vaccinate their kids have not seen the kind of damage that these diseases can do, whether it be measles or smallpox. So they kind of take it not so seriously because they think, you know, you can't have a measles epidemic here. And then somebody made a strange comment. They said, oh, maybe the immigrants brought it. And, well, that's possible because of the scare we had with Ebola. But one of the other things to think about is, I came in as an international student. They wouldn't even grant me admission until I had provided some documentation saying that I had the MMR vaccine, which is the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine. So they're making sure that anybody coming from the outside is vaccinated, but now we need to make sure that the people inside this country get their kids vaccinated if we want to keep everything safe. So what do you guys think? Should we vaccinate our kids? Should we not vaccinate our kids? Why? Why not? Yes?
I think we should, but how do you make a whole country vaccinate? What would be the logistics? If you put it in Congress, how does that work? How do you make somebody vaccinate their children?
Well, I know that in many of the countries in the developing world, unless your kid has had a vaccine, they won't even let you take the baby from the hospital. So the kid has to have had the vaccine. And in places, one of the reasons that, I think it was Nigeria, they were able to quell the Ebola outbreak so quickly for 2 reasons. The first reason was they had a doctor who later died, who recognized the first case of Ebola, kept the patient in the hospital against orders from the president to release that person. That patient eventually died, but by that time the doctors and nurses had also caught it. But because she was able to catch it early, what they did was they had a system in place in which they had volunteers who go out to the villages to talk about polio vaccination. They put that same system, that same network, top to bottom network to good use, and had taught them about Ebola and sent them out to the villages. So I think they only lost something like 20 people because of the fact that they caught it early enough. So we could have something like that here too. But yes, I would agree that it would take an act of Congress, but I don't think all the people in Congress are on board. Yes.
I know that if children are going to go to a public school, they are required to be immunized and vaccinated. But they didn't really have vaccines for like the pneumonia or sinus infections, so kids could still get those, but
Right.
at least they were protected from the rubella, from the tetanus, and they usually say to, instead of immediately taking them all, they say to spread it out.
Correct.
So when you're done with high school, you usually have all your vaccines done, and then you can choose to do a tetanus or anything like that. So I think that there is a good side to the vaccines, but there's also the bad side because you have people like Ms. McCarthy and people that are trying to enroll their kids in schools that have not been vaccinated.
Correct. And there was an article, and there was plenty of news coverage about this father whose daughter has had chemotherapy because the poor little kid has leukemia. So her immune system is basically decimated. And they took their daughter in to a clinic, and they received a call from the clinic 2 days later saying, hey, there's been a measles outbreak. You need to come get your kid a vaccine. So naturally, they went running back in there to get the kid a vaccine. The kid had the vaccine, but of course, when she had chemotherapy, all her WBCs were destroyed. And there was another thing that happened in which there was this child who died of whooping cough. This kid was too young to be vaccinated because you can't give that vaccine to kids, I think, who are under a year old. So that kid was too young to be vaccinated. She caught that from somebody else who had not been vaccinated, and the consequences were fatal for that child, unfortunately. So I think one of the other things we need to realize is it's called herd immunization. So what's herd immunization? Say person X can't take the vaccine for whatever reason. If everybody else have had the vaccine, what does that do to the chances of person X catching the disease? It reduces it. It minimizes it, right? Which is what we want, because especially with old people, with people who have diseases who are immunocompromised, or maybe they're having chemotherapy, or maybe it's really little kids, or maybe people who, for one reason or the other, cannot get this vaccine. This would help minimize it. Now, what do you say to people who say, I'm not going to put that toxin in my body? That's a big one, is it not?
Yeah.
So lots of people think this is a toxin. I am not going to put it in my body. And this I believe is the line that a lot of people who did not get their kids vaccinated in California use. Yes.
To your point, I think the main reason to that is because a lot of people aren't educated as to what, like, the difference between vaccines, like how effective different vaccines are, and when parents go and get their children vaccinated, there's not much of a conversation between the doctor and the parent explaining to them how it works and what it's all encompassed of. So I think that lack of communication and the fact that the parents aren't educated is what really makes it so it's like, oh, these toxins or the poison and all that stuff.
You will be surprised to know that the majority of these people already have college degrees. So,
Doesn't mean they're educated.
my father always says something. He says there's a whole world of difference between being book literate and actually knowing things. So these are people who I guess are followers of Jenny McCarthy. And these people also believe that you're putting a toxin into your body, which you should not be. I was telling my mother about this, and she told me about an incident I had not known about. Apparently, one of our family friends, she's actually my mom's close friend, she had lost a daughter who was 4 months older than me. I never knew about this, because as far as I was concerned, she only had 2 kids, one who was 2 years older than me, and a boy who was 3 years younger than me. But she revealed to me when I told her I was doing this, and we were talking about vaccines, that apparently there was a bad batch of vaccine, and all the kids who got that bad batch of vaccine died. And I asked her, okay, so did your friend even think twice about getting her second child vaccinated? She said no. She never thought twice because in her mind it was very clear. Two choices. If I don't give my kid the vaccine, my kid could die because he will catch the disease. If I get the kid the vaccine, yes, I've had a bad experience with my last one, but my older one is still fine. There's at least a chance that my kid will survive. So I guess it's time to make decisions. Do you want to give your child the tools? Or do you want to play the Russian roulette and see what happens? I mean, a lot of kids may not ever get the measles, even though they've never been vaccinated. But at the same time, would you really want to leave them open to the risk that they get it when they're older, when things are going to be a little harder for them? How many of you are allergic to some kind of medication? Yeah. So even I'm allergic to medication. So maybe it shouldn't come as a surprise to know that I reacted pretty badly when I got the chickenpox vaccine. So I had to be taken to the ER because I got hives and it was crazy. I was scratching nonstop, so they had to take me to the ER. And I basically got told, do not take, it's a 3-course vaccine. They said, do not take course 2 or course 3 because you will die. Because you're reacting very, very badly to the vaccine. And then I went back and we read the literature, and it said 1 in a million people will have this reaction. Guess what? I guess I was that 1 in a million. The ER had never seen that kind of reaction. The doctors in the student health had never seen that kind of reaction. I talked to a couple of doctors at the other hospital I went to. Nobody had ever seen this reaction. But guess what? I was the 1 in a million case. So there are situations where vaccines may not work for everybody, but in the majority of the cases, they do succeed in giving you a measure of immunity. And yes, there was a component in vaccines that was not considered safe that has now been removed. So the vaccines now are safer than ever. And when the incident with my mom's friend's daughter happened, the quality control was not as strict then as it is now. Now they have strict quality control on vaccines. Yes?
I think this really goes back to your earlier point, which is that you have a lot of people in the U.S. who've never seen these diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of Americans don't think of things like the measles or polio or smallpox as potentially being a death sentence to their child. And so they fixate on small things like what is in the vaccine that's going into my body. This study that you mentioned that's misrepresented the link between autism and vaccines. And I think because Americans haven't seen that, and you have doctors who've never even seen cases of measles.
True. They had to bring in older doctors to teach the younger ones what to look for and diagnose measles.
So I think I think vaccines are amazing, and I don't have children, but when I do, there's no question in my mind that I would give them these vaccines because I'd rather that than see them die of some other preventable disease. And I think that people should consider what the worst case scenario of getting these diseases really are. And I think that it's not something that's really in our consciousness just because it's been, we don't see these diseases in a really long time.
You know, I always wondered when we had the Ebola scare, whether if there was a vaccine available for Ebola, would these people vaccinate themselves or not? I always wondered. Just because of the point she just made, because people have never seen this disease. There's never been the panic that this could be life-threatening. Nobody thinks of measles as life-threatening because there aren't those many cases of measles. But this is the first time you had something at your door that could be serious. So would people recognize the fact that this was so serious that it's okay to go get a vaccine because if you don't get the vaccine, the chances are that you could die? Because in much of the developing world, that is the choice. Your child could die. Yes?
But also, even in the U.S., it's a question of privilege to an extent, because what about people who don't have access to quality health care and they're taking a much bigger risk by choosing not to vaccinate. So
True. I mean, I agree with that people should have the choice, but sometimes when your choices are affecting others, I think you have to think about whether your choices actually are the right ones.
I like that you were saying that, in the context of what I see, especially kind of proliferating through social media, because I think there are legitimate concerns. It's a developing world versus developed world mentality, and these notions are what is affecting possibly public health in general. So I think that looking at some of these things and trying to figure out in a first world context how to address that would be beneficial. I keep seeing that, when you have the two minds kind of butting heads, it's like one becomes more entrenched in their view versus, trying to come to a consensus somehow. So, for example, I'm taking your word because you're a scientist, much like how we take doctors' words of faith, but we operate in a world that's filled with, corruption and, so I'm hearing you speak about quality control of vaccines, and I have an engineering background, so that makes me wonder, well, what does quality control for vaccines means? I hear of toxic metal chemicals, and honestly, I don't know. I don't know if vaccines already have a percentage of people that obviously have allergic reactions to them where they can die. In the context of today and social media, that really kind of snowballs.
Well, but you
And
see,
people magnify that.
Correct.
It could be like 0.01%, but because,
And with my case, I think one of the things I should highlight is that I was told these are the things you need to watch for. If any of these things happen, you need to go running to the nearest ER. So I was told that I could have hives. And so I guess I should have made that point that they gave me the instructions that these are the things that you gotta watch for. I just never had an adverse reaction to any vaccine before. That was the first time for me. And since then, I make it a point to ask, hey, what are the adverse effects? But yeah, the point somebody else was making, that they have a nurse give you the shot. They don't tell you what the effects, what you need to watch for, or what else could happen. That's a very, very good point, a very, very valid point. Yes.
To that, that's where you would start doing risk management, because what you have to take into account is the fact that even though there's a chance that someone could have a very bad allergic reaction to the vaccine, or that there's a chance that maybe a company might have screwed up a batch and there was a bad batch of vaccines that would cause a bad reaction to those who take it, you have to take into account the fact that those have very low probabilities of occurring. When you mention the quality control, all of that is to make sure that obviously they can't eliminate the risk of a bad reaction to the vaccine, but they can make the probability of that risk as low as possible. So you have to take into account what is the chance of me having a bad reaction to the vaccine versus me having a very bad time with the disease that I could potentially catch if I leave myself untreated and exposed to the disease. Because honestly, when you take into account that, there's very low chance that you're going to have a reaction to it. You mentioned that you were the 1 in a million chance versus the 1 in how many hundred chances of someone catching the measles virus. So even though there is a slight percentage of something bad happening, because obviously nothing can have a 100% chance of everything good happening, you have to take into account the difference in risk. Taking the vaccine does lower your risk, and even though you can't eliminate the risk entirely, you should still do whatever it takes to reduce your risk of catching that disease or having a bad reaction as low as possible. And that's the reason why they have the quality control. That's the reason why they check over everything, why they double check, triple check, quadruple check all of the different vaccines to make sure that there's as low a chance of a bad reaction as possible. That's all.
Yes, that is thank you. Yes, that's a very, very important point he makes. And that gets back to your point that we live in the world of social media now, where everything just gets amplified and magnified and embellished.
And the other thing is, you have a very different mind than the populace. Like
That's very true.
You're a scientist. You know what
Right.
I mean? You can approach a decision in the way that he's kind of framing it.
So it's all,
you know?
for me, it's all evidence, evidence, evidence. Where is the evidence?
But the general public, they don't do that. You know, it's
Correct.
more of an effective reaction.
Which is why we're standing where we are. You're very right, because the paper that kind of spawned all this has been debunked. Even then, there were a lot of skeptics about that paper. I mean, I didn't believe that paper when it came out, and I was a graduate student at that point. So I had not even done the degree of research, but it just didn't sit right. It just didn't seem right to me. But yes, there is a lot of people who think that's true, and I would totally agree with doing your research. You're not going to go out and buy a new car or a new TV just because you saw a commercial on TV and you're like, oh, that TV looks nice, so I'm just going to walk into Best Buy and give them whatever price they're asking.
Some people do shop.
Not too many from what I know. Most of them do their research. They're like, okay, when is this thing going to go on sale? I'm going to wait. Let me research the specs of this thing. Let me see if there's anything better than this thing on the market for a lower price. Maybe Amazon has a better deal. We all do that. So why not when it comes to questions of our health? You had something to say.
So one of the things was to your point about social media. I just personally have a problem with the fact that it's even a debate, because if you have like scientists on one side just like giving you all the evidence, and then on the news you have like a counter side, which is like the politicians like Rand Paul trying to give you like their perspective, like they have no say in here. Like it shouldn't even be a debate. So I think one of the biggest problems that makes it like a debate in social media is that there are two sides when there shouldn't be, because that side has already been run. And another thing is comparing the different types of vaccines. Like, for example, we're not required to get the flu vaccine because it's not as effective. So what are your thoughts about the flu vaccine? Because I'm sure not a lot, like I've never gotten the flu vaccine just because I just don't feel like I need to, but how should that be taken into account?
I think
I agree, because I have a son and he's 17 months old, and I refused because I didn't feel like he needed to get one.
the flu vaccine.
Yes. And they gave me a paper, like 2 pages, that I had to sign that I refused, and they made me feel like I'm doing something wrong.
Well, I think if it's something like,
That's just salesman tactics. Don't worry about that. They always make you feel bad.
well, but you have to understand that everybody has gone a little bit into panic mode. They want to make sure that people are getting vaccines, all kinds of vaccines, after what they saw, the outbreak of the measles that happened in Disneyland. In fact, I don't know how Disneyland is going to enforce this, but I read somewhere that they're not going to let in any kid who's not had the measles vaccine. And I'm sitting here going, how are they going to prove to you at the gate that they've had the measles vaccine? That every parent expected to carry a measles card, a vaccination card now. And why are you only picking on the kids? Why are you not asking if the parents got vaccinated, you know? Maybe the parents didn't get vaccinated. So, yeah, it is a hard choice to make. And especially as parents, it is a very, very hard choice to make. But for something like the flu, in the majority of the cases, it's not fatal, which is possibly the case with measles also. But when you start saying no to vaccines, you're also opening yourself up to diseases like the whooping cough, the mumps. The mumps is a specific, it's a scary disease because when you get it when you are older, it can have really bad side effects. And then, because it's believed to affect your reproductive organs, so it can lead to sterility, which is why they say it's better if you have it when you're little, you get the vaccine, And there is, scarily, 1983, they actually said smallpox is eradicated. But smallpox has begun to come back in small pockets because people stopped vaccinations. And so if smallpox comes back, that's a bigger battle. That's a battle that we're going to have to fight at some point if we keep up with what we're doing. Yeah.
And that's like another potential consideration for people who aren't willing to take the vaccine in the first place. The fact that viruses are like constantly evolving and developing resistance. So they'll feel like if I take it now, okay, but then later on it's going to develop a new strand, or it's going to, evolve in some way that I'm going to have to retake it.
Correct.
They feel like it's like not worth it to have to go through the process several times.
Correct. So the flu vaccine, unfortunately, is one of those viruses that likes to mutate a lot, which is why you have to take it every season. But thankfully, most of the vaccines are pretty good because not all viruses are like the flu virus, which really likes to mutate. And the flu is pretty nasty. There have been times when it has wiped out entire populations. There was one, I forget what they call it, 1928, I think, sometime in Asia, 1928 or 1958. I remember reading about this. They called it the Great Flu Epidemic. Basically wiped out almost the entire population. So the flu can be pretty dangerous, very, very virulent form of flu. So it can be pretty dangerous. So which is why they suggest that, so your flu vaccine is basically a mixture of last year's most virulent strains, plus whatever they can best hazard a guess the vaccine, the flu virus is going to do. But of course the virus is smarter, sometimes it changes in ways we do not expect. But it is a choice that we do make. That, hey, am I going to get the vaccine or not? So for some diseases, I believe it's okay for us to make the choice. But for some other diseases, I wonder whether, it's important for everybody to be vaccinated. Say, a smallpox vaccine. If somebody asks me whether the smallpox vaccine is important to give everybody the smallpox vaccine, what do you think my answer would be? Absolutely. I think everybody should get the smallpox vaccine. If smallpox ever comes back, everybody should be vaccinated. Because that disease is so dangerous. I've seen pictures, and yes, I have my uncle to see what damage it could do. And apparently lots of kids never survived. My dad tells me of playmates he lost to this disease or the other disease. Because he grew up in the 1940s in India, it was pretty rural. So yeah, medical facilities were not the greatest in the world. So let's look at the other aspect of it. Autism and its link to vaccines, which for the longest times they claimed it was linked to vaccines. Now there's been a lot of research done after that, which showed that there are other risk factors for autism. So you all read the paper. Can you tell me what some of the other risk factors are? Yes. Go ahead.
They say like it's linked to genetics,
Mm-hmm.
or the mom
Mm-hmm.
gets sick during pregnancy.
Yes. So, as two people rightly said, it is linked. They have found genes that predispose a person to autism. Now, I'm not using the word predispose lightly. It doesn't mean that if this person has a gene, they're going to be autistic for sure. It just means that the chances of them developing autism is much higher. Because there is enough research studies to show that anytime a person is predisposed, which means they have a genetic chance of getting a disease, environment plays a huge deal. Because how the situation around them is, maybe how much stress they're under, what kind of food they eat, what kind of chemicals they're exposed to, all this determines whether they ultimately develop that particular disease, whether or not we can't even call it a disease, condition. So it may be autism. This has been proved in case of diabetes over and over again. Mom and dad both have diabetes. Some of this in their kids, some kids get it, some kids don't. So if there really is an aspect of that we got to look at. Yes.
So is this more? So it's not link more to the specific gene, but more the epigenetics did, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
when those markers turn on, when they turn
Correct. When it turned off, when it turned on, and it's not just one gene, it's like multiple genes.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, what's the state of mind of the mother when she was having the baby, how much work she was having to do, was there any serious stress involved, how much stress the mother was under, what kind of chemicals was she exposed to. So there's a lot of other things that play into it, and there is really no real data that I've seen so far that links vaccines to autism unequivocally. And I've looked at a lot of the literature because this is something that really caught my attention. And so far I have not seen anything that could conclusively prove that vaccines are connected to autism.
I was watching something like a documentary film, I forgot what it was. I think it was Nat Geo, where they had two twins. You know, they share 100% of their genealogy. I guess one developed, you know, she was outgoing, charismatic, all the other one was kind of a little off. Even though they shared the same genetic material, it proved something different there. So that's what I was kind of.
So yes, they have done studies on twins. They have done studies on fraternal twins, on identical twins. And there is a whole ton of literature out there on autism. And there's also a school of people who believes that we are overdiagnosing our kids, in the sense that maybe somebody who wouldn't have been diagnosed as being autistic several years ago is now being diagnosed as autistic. I'm not sure how true that is. I just believe we may have better tests for diagnosis. Also, they're training teachers to catch these kinds of behaviors early. So that may have something to do with it. But yes, there's more kids being diagnosed with autism, ADHD, and some of the drugs that they're giving these kids are downright scary. Yeah.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
Out of curiosity, and because I know that your background is in chemistry, so these notions of like toxic chemicals, like I'm just coming back to
Correct.
that. Are there chemicals in the vaccines that operate below a certain toxic threshold level, and what are they?
So I think you have to look at each vaccine separately to see what are the components of the vaccine. But most of these vaccines, you must remember, are rigorously regulated by the FDA, which means they went through animal trials, then they went through human trials. Only then were they allowed to come on the market. If you remember during, I think it was called ZMapp, the drug that was given to Nancy Reibold and I forget the name of the doctor, the first doctor who came to the United States with Ebola was treated. Those two were given ZMapp. So one of the big things about not making enough ZMapp and just distributing it to the whole of Africa was they didn't have the resources to make it because it was an experimental drug. The second thing was it had not been tested. They had only tested it in monkeys before. They had no idea what the side effects were in humans. But with these two people, they had no choice because if they didn't give it to them, these people would be dead. So they figured, okay, rather than worry about the side effects, let's just give it to them, and whichever way, the dice rolls, it rolls. But when you're dealing with a large population, you can't do that. So you have to do all kinds of rigorous tests. So they have to prove that these drugs don't have side effects, or even these vaccines don't have side effects. There's actually 2 Ebola vaccines that are undergoing trials right now. And the hope is that at least one of these is going to immunize against the disease, and they can hopefully start giving it to people in Africa. Because that's where Ebola is coming the most often. So, yes, they do take a close look at what is in those vaccines. And when they find out that there is a component that could be possibly toxic, they will take it out. I could be wrong about the name of this component. It was called thiacemerol or thiameserol or something like that. They found that it was not as good as they thought it was going to be, so they promptly took it out. Now, the vaccine itself has to be stabilized. So they will use lots of chemicals just to make sure that the vaccine is in a form that it's stabilized, it can be given to the patient, and it actually stays in the body of the patient so long that the antibodies can be made. So there is a lot of work that goes into vaccine development. And yes, prevention is the best cure. We all know that. Yes?
So you were talking about the studies that happened before it's brought into the market. Are there any long-term studies on vaccines, like really long-term, like generations?
I don't think anybody has done a generation-long study, but I think most of those are. My guess is there are. They have never been published. Because most governments do keep that kind of data. I think the FDA would probably have that kind of data to show the efficacy of the vaccine over the years, how many people were immunized, and so on and so forth. But I don't think that they have ever published those in the form of a research paper. They have put out reports which say, these many people were vaccinated, this is how good these vaccines are, and so on and so forth. But I would guess that you can probably look for that data more in the developing countries because they do come out periodically with these kinds of things.
Because to her point, in terms of toxins and all that stuff, a lot of the time there are deleterious effects that you have on your health that only happen like later on in your life.
Correct.
So
correct.
In order to really understand the way that vaccines affect and like those toxins affect your whole body, you would have to do a really long-term study.
Correct. You would have to do a really long-term study, and I think if there were really those many deleterious effects of any vaccine, they probably would have come out by now, would be my guess, because especially considering how many people are immunized with most of these common vaccines, if there was something seriously wrong with them, I guess we would have found out by now, because those kinds of things are monitored. Like if you go tell your doctor is duty bound to tell the FDA. So we would have found out. And word gets out really fast, even before social media. You tell your neighbor, your neighbor tells their neighbor. That network is very, very effective.
This way, if they're complaining about a study that isn't even true, there would be a lot of press about a study if it actually did turn out to be true.
Oh, I'm just wondering if the studies even happen.
Oh, they're always doing studies.
Well, I'm sure, yeah, there's studies going on.
Yeah, I bet the FDA has data. They have data.
Do you know of any maybe strategy employed by the U.S. Health Department to combat this campaign of misinformation that's out there about vaccination?
I think they're walking a very fine line because our country believes in freedom, and to a certain extent, you can't force parents to vaccinate their children. There's a lot of people who believe that, and with politicians, the problem is they're always looking to make hay while the sun shines. So, as with the Rand Paul example, he's a doctor. And he said something, and people went after him, and he had to go get a booster shot of MMR to kind of prove that he was really not anti-vaccination. Quite a few of the politicians, President Obama included, have come and said that you must vaccinate your kids. But I doubt that the Congress has enacted any legislation. There has been a lot of media attention, and they have brought doctors on who say it is important to vaccinate your kids.
I'm talking more along the lines of maybe creating PAs to maybe educate the public at large,
I think that may be coming down the pike, because in my opinion, this is still not ballooned enough, big enough to become a public health hazard for them to begin to take notice of this. But you never know. They probably haven't come out with something in public. There may be something in the works behind the scenes, because there have already been outbreaks in California, in Chicago, and in a third state, which I don't remember at this moment. But there have been outbreaks, and I believe that the White House and the FDA are already sitting up and taking attention. But what exactly their plans are, they haven't made them public.
You know, I'm thinking about, like, if you look at, just to give an example, the NFL with the whole domestic abuse, anti-domestic abuse campaign they have going on with various, like, celebrities and former, pro players on there. You know, I was thinking that along the lines of that, maybe the government can kind of put out, public service announcements like that.
I have never seen anything like that in the United States, but I come from India, and they will leverage any publicity they can find, any celebrity they can find to have them make those kinds of announcements. I remember they got Amitabh Bachchan, who's like the #1 film star there. He did a public service announcement. I think it was about polio vaccination. They got the cricketing stars to all talk about different kinds of vaccinations. So yes, they do leverage that. But I have not seen anything like that in the United States. Yes?
I was just wondering, because I know like vaccinations are required to enter public schools, but parents can get a personal exemption.
Correct.
What's required to get that personal exemption? Because I know in some states, like I was reading the other day that Mississippi, like doesn't give them. Like the only reason you can get an exemption from vaccinations in Mississippi is a medical reason, like your body can't take the vaccine. But there are other states that give them out like more often. What do you need to do to get that?
I think it depends on the state. I know that there are certain people who get this exemption based on religious reasons. I don't exactly know what these religions are and why they don't believe in the vaccination process. But I do happen to know that there are certain religions who can get this exception. Maybe they are not even a religion. Maybe they are like a sect of a certain religion. So I don't know what it is. But I do know that some religions do not want their kids vaccinated. So that is a basis. And they also give a basis for medical reasons. Maybe you cannot be vaccinated. In California, some schools will basically, because your parents kind of free speech kind of thing. Parents don't want you to, they'll let you do that.
Like people's beliefs, I don't think it has a place in these in this environment, scientific environment. So,
correct.
Like science is not something to believe in. It's something to either be, if you use an objective criteria,
right,
to either validate or invalidate.
Correct.
And that's what people don't get. There's a certain dichotomy between your personal beliefs and what you can prove and disprove.
Correct. And in many cases, when beliefs clash with science, science loses. Beliefs win. Yes.
So you're saying, when beliefs and science clash with science loses, but if like a child is exposed to this, like for example, smallpox, and there's an outbreak, and it came from a child that you didn't want to get vaccinated, how does the government intervene with that? What are the steps that they do to deal with that? Do they make the child take the vaccination because they're exposed, or they kind of shut them out from society? How does that work exactly?
I think the Attorney General of the United States will be very interested in talking to you right now, because I think he's grappling with the same problem. There are people whose kids have not been vaccinated, who have triggered these outbreaks of measles, and questions are being asked right now just along the lines as you have asked, what are we going to do with these people? And I watched an interview, or I read, I don't remember, there was this parent who went as far as to say that the parents of the kid who was not vaccinated or basically committing culpable homicide. No, I won't go that far. But one of the parents did. So I think a majority of it is education. We have to educate these people and say, you know, this could happen. You have to make sure that your child is vaccinated. And I believe it's also societal responsibility. That as a society, we have to start realizing that we have responsibilities to people beyond our own family. We have responsibilities to society. If we don't vaccinate our children, somebody else's child who can't have the vaccine can get sick. So there was this dad on TV, he even went to the Congress. His child cannot have the vaccine because he's undergoing chemotherapy. So he wanted the school district to prevent all the children who had not been vaccinated against measles from coming to school, so that his son could go to school. So what's the school district to do? So these are the kinds of situations we're going to grapple with more and more unless we start getting our kids vaccinated.
Was that the same case where the school told parents they couldn't bring peanut products into the school because of peanut allergies causing very serious repercussions in children? I believe it was the same father who, in the PTA, stood up and said, well, if we're not bringing peanuts to school because it could kill children, I need you to vaccinate your kids because my kid cannot be vaccinated. And the school district later came out that people were very, very upset when he said that. It was in California.
Right. It's possibly the same father.
I don't know if it was the same father, but
yes,
that's a very interesting story to look up if you want to.
Yeah. Yes.
I think something that's interesting is that we were talking previously about privilege and how there's people who don't have access to vaccines. In the case of Miami, I know that there's the Miami-Dade County Public Health Services, like, will give you free vaccination. I'm not sure about the rest of the counties. But I think it's really interesting that the people who are opting out of vaccination is like the most affluent communities in California, and I think it goes back to this whole like holistic health concept that they don't want to put toxins in their body and they want to eat organic food and like all of these things. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that there's not a lot of trust from these communities, and I think that's like a widespread thing that we're not really trusting a lot, like where our food comes from, where like the pharmaceutical companies, like all of these organizations and corporations that we're not really trusting as much because they've proven to not be as trustworthy as we thought they were. So kind of I see where they're coming from in terms of like not trusting them, but perhaps that's something that the pharmaceutical companies and these organizations should work on, maybe perhaps being a lot more transparent as to how they conduct their business, and then people will be more likely to vaccinate their kids.
True. That's a very valid point, because I agree that the trust levels are down. They're way down from where they were maybe 20 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago.
Yeah, to add to that, also, and it's like a popular subculture that's like building in California, especially the affluent neighborhoods, like concepts of like organic, non-GMO, where's our food coming from, like what are these pesticides coming, like putting in our food, like veganism or not eating meat, and in that whole umbrella, like the whole anti-vaccination movement has come. But I feel it's like not because they necessarily have to be related, because I'm vegan, but I'm very for vaccines. But because it's that whole trust, like not trusting these big institutions, like for-profit institutions that like control so much of our health components. That I feel it would be really hard to attack that subculture and like make them believe that we should vaccinate unless that transparency comes from those institutions.
I think it would also help if you kind of brought to their attention the fact that they have not realized that these diseases could be as scary as COVID, as they don't think. They don't think these diseases are scary because they figure, oh, you know, I live in an affluent neighborhood. These diseases kind of are not going to come in here. But what they fail to realize is they're going to get on a plane at some point, they're going to get on a train at some point, they're going to go for a vacation someplace, and they could actually get exposed to these things at those locations. And especially global travel is at an all-time high. And the example I like to give is, hey, there have been 4 plane disasters in the last year. That does not mean that you're not getting on a plane ever again, right?
Going to what they said, I think maybe like third-party evaluations might help to alleviate some of that distrust, you know. And then you also have the FDA that does some of these evaluations as well. So maybe more independent entities coming in from the outside that's not a part of the industry doing their own evaluation of that, with their own science, they're batch scientists,
Yeah.
Kind of help.
So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stick around if anybody wants to ask any questions.